Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Uh, I welcome all once again. This is Nitin Sridhar, Chief Curator of Advaita Academy. A very warm welcome, Shubhodaya, good morning to everyone. This is second session of this Weekend with Wisdom with Gokul Muthuji. And yesterday we had a wonderful session on Vedanta for the scientific minded. And today he will be continuing on that. So let us just begin with a small prayer. Vakratunda Mahakaya Koti Surya Samaprabha Nirvigyam Kurume Deva Sarvakareshu Sarvada Sarvamangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostate Ishvaro Gururatmiti Murti Beda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyaptadeháya Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. So with this short prayer and opening remarks, I already introduced our honorable speaker yesterday. Here, just to those who have joined us today, he is currently pursuing his PhD in IIT Kharagpur, and he is a computer software engineer, and he has studied in IIT Madras and Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and he is currently working. And he is he belongs to, or he subscribes to, inspired by Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda tradition, and he is also trained in the traditional Vedanta. And I welcome you, sir, on the behalf of the entire Advaita Academy and all our audience. Thank you for making time for this program. And viewers, if you have missed the yesterday's session, just I'll briefly share with you what Gokulji mentioned yesterday. He basically gave a presentation about how the Vedanta on one hand and the modern science on other hand are based on different paradigms, and each paradigm is valid on its own. It is incorrect to judge Vedanta or the Indian philosophical systems using a scientific paradigm. Similarly, it is not possible to reject or deny the findings of the modern science using the Darshanic paradigm per se, in the sense, though we may put forward a different theory to explain the observations, we have to accept the observations per se. And he spoke in detail about how Vedanta is helpful to us, how Vedanta is very useful to us, and how we can, in a sense, logically and scientifically approach Vedanta, and in a rational manner understand Vedanta, pursue Vedanta as a method of analysis, as a method of spirituality. So with brief opening remarks, I request Gokulji to start his session and share with our audience more insights on this topic.
Namaste to everyone. So let me share from again. Okay, now first I need to share my screen, then I need to start my presentation. So, able to see my screen?
Yes, we are able to see your screen.
Okay, good. So yesterday we, as Nitin ji gave a small recall. So yesterday we analyzed what is science, what is not science, and how they tried to explain and interpret the world which we see around us, and how the yukti or logic cannot be violated, and to explain the anubhava which we see outside. And we also looked at Karl Popper and Shankaracharya, who defined the boundaries of what comes under science and what doesn't come under science. And then we also looked at several questions and several problems which are everyday problems, but which don't come under the purview of science. And then we analyzed what is the purpose of human life, and then where religion comes, where philosophy comes. So we analyzed all of them, and then we had a pretty detailed analysis of what is happiness, what is it that we are seeking, and so that is where we stopped. Today is going to be slightly more heavy, more technical, more involved in the Vedanta, and let us see uh, how much we can go and like try to, because we need to complete two things. One is the what is called as the Vyavaharika model, and also the Paramarthika model. So I'll try to split the time between them so that we are able to complete. And finally, if there is some time possible, then we can look into some of the practical aspects. Okay, fine. So what we found was we all seek happiness, and the happiness what we are seeking is unconditional happiness, and which is beyond space and time. Like we said, like we want happiness everywhere, we want happiness at all times. And so if such a happiness is possible, then it should be here and now. And if it is here and now, then what can be the problem? The problem can be only the knowledge. So because in fact, like there's a very beautiful statement in Mundaka Upanishad. There's a very famous mantra which says Parichya Lokan Karmachitan Brahmano Nirvedam Ayat. In that it says Nasti Akrita Kritena. That's a very beautiful conclusion. So what it means is an infinite result cannot be attained by a finite process. Nasti akrita kritena. An infinite result cannot be attained by a finite process. It's such a beautiful insight. And so what we are seeking is infinite unconditional happiness. Now, unconditional happiness cannot be the result of a finite process. In fact, nothing unconditional, nothing infinite can be attained by a finite process. So if you say like, okay, like by a finite process you can attain eternal heaven or eternal hell, like that it is absolutely illogical, right? So an infinite result cannot be got by a finite process. Nasti akrita kritena. So if you are looking for an absolute unconditional infinite result, then there is no finite process which can reach it. It should be there here and now. There is no question of reaching it. But then there can be another way, which because of which it is not available now, which is ignorance. So knowledge is the only possibility of removing the ignorance of the infinite happiness which is already here and now with us, right? Now, just like how a small cloud can hide the big sun, similarly knowledge has to be unrevealed by blowing away the cloud of ignorance, and that is the process by which the infinite is attained. And this is what is highlighted both by Sankhya and Vedanta. They both share the same role here. So now when we say knowledge is the gap, which knowledge, what knowledge, knowledge of what? And knowledge of everything, and finally rests on the knowledge of I. So Vedanta explores both the universe and I, and ultimately, like, knowing truly who I am is going to solve the problem, and that is what we are going to discuss for the next 1.5 2 hours. And we need to start from where we are, right? Like, we cannot each person is in a different place, and we need to start from where we are, right? So Vedanta gives a two-stepped approach, and so we covered this already yesterday, we discussed this. So the first step is to move from an identity with the body mind complex to an identity which is called as the jivatma, which we will define. And the second step is to shift our identity from the jivatma to the atma, right? Which is the self with a capital S, is what is usually used in the books of Chinmaya Mission, Ramakrishna Mission, Divine Life Society. Like, they have a kind of, a standard vocabulary which was established by Swami Vivekananda himself, which is commonly followed by many of the English publishing houses. Like, so consciousness with a capital C means the Shuddha Chaitanya, and the consciousness with a small c means the reflected consciousness, the Chidabhasa. So there is a kind of English vocabulary which has been created for these non-translatables. And so a self with a small s basically means Jivatma, and a self with a capital S means Atma. Okay, fine. So now this also answers a lot of practical questions which we are facing in everyday life. Now, as I told you, like, these questions are not verifiable. They don't come under the falsifiability criteria of Karl Popper. And according to Shankara, these are all Atindriya Vishaya. And Atindriya Vishaya, for Atindriya Vishaya, your Pratyaksha Pramana, the Indriyas, cannot be a proof. Like, your science cannot, has no access and has no capability to answer these questions, because these are beyond the realm or domain of science. So, some of the questions here: why do bad things happen to good people? This is a question which, this is an eternal question of mankind, and people have been asking this question, especially the good people, right? They keep asking this. And why are some people luckier than others, right? Like, some people, like, whatever they put their hands on, it works, like what they call as the, like, the Midas touch or the golden touch, like, so why are some people luckier than the others? And whereas some other people, in spite of a lot of hard work which they put in, like, success doesn't seems to always elude them, right? And okay, like, if you talk about, okay, some people putting effort and not putting effort, lucky, you can say, okay, like, well, some people put a smart effort, they put a hard effort, they, because of that, they got success. But then how do you explain some children born to rich parents and some children born to poor parents, right? Some children are, they are disadvantaged right from birth, and either in terms of the circumstances, or in terms of health or physical conditions, mental conditions. Now, why is there so much of taratamya, like so much of differences right from birth itself? Like, how do we explain it? You know, these are questions which are fundamental questions which keep bothering us, right? And what is the point in being honest and helpful and goody goody and all that? Like, when there is a bully who comes and then he snatches away everything and goes away, and things the people who are apparently, like, who are violating all the ethical and legal norms, they seem to be leading a much better life, apparently, right? Like, and the people who are honest and helpful, and, like, they might be having some peace of mind that is there, but then like, externally they seem to be suffering. Like, so is there any point? Like, what is the point in being honest, helpful? Like, why should we be so, right? What is the purpose of life? Like, where are we going? Like, okay, you might initially you might say, okay, like, I should make ensure that my family and my dependents are financially sound, and then next I might want to achieve some name and fame or whatever. Now, is this all, like, and death snatches everything away, and so is there a purpose of life? Now, is there a purpose to the whole thing? Like, now, let us say, for example, a person is blessed with a lot of talents. Let us say, like, he has got a great intellect and very skillful, and like, he can really achieve a lot. Now, if that person says, okay, well, I might have talent, but I don't want to do all those things. He prefers to be lazy and just not utilize them. Like, is that okay? Like, like, these are, like, these are all age old questions, not only in the east but also in the west. Like Immanuel Kant's beautiful theories, like, of the obligations, like, what is talent, what is the imperatives, right? Like, there are beautiful concepts. Now, yes, but they all are more normative. And if we ask a question why, now still we don't have an answer, right? Like, so now that is the question which we want to ask here. Like, it is not a question of what we want to do. Of course it is important, like, what is right, what is wrong, like, we need to know the moral implications, and then, like, what is morality, right? Like, so these things are there, and of course we can come up with answers, right? And both the east and west, both the eastern philosophies, western philosophies, everyone has come up with answers on what is right, what is wrong, to different levels of being relative and absolute. But then ultimately, if you ask a question why, now there is no answer, right? For the question of why, there is no answer. And that is the question which Vedanta tries to answer. And in fact, like, many belief systems, many structured systems trying to answer. And after long exploration, what I have found was Vedanta gives one of the most comprehensive and most logical and rational system. And that is what I appreciate. Like, yesterday I talked to you about pramanas and the different ways of knowledge, and how different systems accept different sources of knowledge, but finally Vedanta rejects everything and then finally sticks to just the bare minimum of pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. Like, uh, so the beauty of Advaita Vedanta is, it goes to the bare minimum of the sources of knowledge. It completely discards all the mind oriented, like, like the mind oriented, uh, purely mental conceptions, as like, it can be kapola kalpitam, it can be just hallucinations. It rejects all of them, and sticks to the bare minimum set of pramanas, right? Like, just the pratyaksha pramana, and then the anumana, upamana, anupalabdhi, arthapati, and the shabda pramana. Just with these, it works towards and a beautiful system, and it goes ahead and proposes the model. And when I put these questions here, all these questions are what we face in day to day life. I have not even brought in, like, the other things. Like, say, for example, the University of Virginia have done a lot of research on the past birth and the rebirth concept. They've done a lot of work on children who can remember their past lives. Now, we are not even bringing them here how to answer those questions. We are not bringing in how Ramanujam was able to come up with this formula. Fine, those you can say, okay, those are exceptions. Of course, in science, you cannot even reject the exceptions. Like, you have the black swan theory. You can look it up for a black swan theory. Like, even if there is one exception which is not explainable by a current model, the model has to be fixed, or the model has to be rejected. So just one Srinivasa Ramanujam is enough to bring down the entire edifice of a materialistic model which someone might have built up, right? And you might be and you might close your eyes to it, but then, like, sooner or later you have to explain it, right? So even if out of the thousands of cases which University of Virginia has been working on, even if one of the past birth memories which they have recorded, if it happens to be true, then the whole system of science has to be redone, right? Now, I'm not bringing them here still, right? Now, those are questions which, like, so sooner or later science has to bring it into its purview. Here, of course, we are just looking at only the non-verifiable questions. Okay, to answer these questions which we face in everyday life, now, is there a model which can which we can use. Okay, so this is where Vedanta comes. And first I'll press, and as I told you, like there are two models. One is the Vyavaharika model, another one is the Paramarthika model. I'll first present to you the Vyavaharika model, right, which answers all these questions for an individual at a practical empirical level, which we can apply in everyday life. Okay, fine. So going ahead, so the first thing is, who is the individual, right? The theory, so we have in Western and Eastern psychology, like the one of the core problems is the theory of personality, right? So who is the individual, what is the person, right? And Vedanta, we take the Panchakosha model, like where there are 5 layers. Of course you can call it as 3 layers, 5 layers, like, so let us stick to one of them, which is 5 layers. Like for example, like Swami Chinmayananji, he has uh, kind of simplified this model into make it as 3 layers: BMI, body, mind, intellect, where he has basically combined 4 and 5 and 1 and 2, right? Like 1 and 2 together he calls as the B, and 3 is M, and then the 4 and 5 he combines together and calls it as the I. But let us, for this, let us stick to the traditional what is given in the Veda, in the Upanishads and the Gita, where we talk about 5 layers. Okay, and so we have Annamaya Kosha, which is the physical body. Now the way you can understand it, like I once I heard in Indian Institute of Science, Dr. Nagendra ji explained this in a very beautiful way. So basically what he says is, what is common between a dead body which has just now died and a living body? Now, right? So what is common is Annamaya Kosha. Annamaya Kosha is common for a just now dead body and a living body. Now that is a physical sheath, right? Then comes the Pranamaya Kosha. That is what is different between a dead body and a living body. But then what is different, what is common between a person in coma and a person who is like kicking around and moving around? So what is common is the Pranamaya Kosha. Life is there, but there is nothing beyond it, right? The basic life is there, but beyond that, things are missing in a person who is in coma. Now, next level is Manomaya Kosha. There, it's Manomaya Kosha is the emotions. So where, like, which is common between animals and human beings, and also you can say for a unmatta, like, a person who is mad, and also with a normal person. So the emotions are there. Like, if you as Shankaracharya says in the this thing Adhyasa Bhashya, like, if you show a stick, if you to a cow, if you show some grass, the cow will come towards you. If you show a stick, the cow will go away. Now the same thing applies to, in general, to any human being or any animal at that level, right? Like, you are just driven by sticks and carrots. You know what harms you, what hurts you, what uh, supports your life, and then you behave based on that. So that is the Manomaya Kosha, is where likes and dislikes are there. And then next level is Vijnanamaya Kosha, where you have the concept of right and wrong, right? Like your buddhi, right? So there is a beautiful Sanskrit shloka which says, Ahara nidra bhayam maitunam cha samanyam yetat pashubir naranam buddhirhi tesham adhiko visheshaha buddhir vihina pashubir naranam. Like, so the common to all animals and human beings is Ahara, Nidra, Bhaya, Maituna, right? So those all come under up to Manomaya Kosha. Now, Vijnanamaya Kosha introduces Buddhi, by which we have the Dharma, Adharma, Viveka, like what is right and what is wrong. So that concept comes in the Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then comes the Anandamaya Kosha, which is the core individuality, right? So the Avidya, right? So at the core individuality rests there, and that is where I would like to put the karma, samskara, and free will, right? So those belong to the Anandamaya Kosha. So now with these we can analyze, right? So as I told you, the gross body is Annamaya Kosha, and now there is another way of classifying, putting the 2, 3, and 4 together, which is called the subtle body. So the gross body, which is Sthula Sharira, is Annamaya Kosha, and the Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha together is called the subtle body, or the Sukshma Sharira. And interestingly, the Sukshma Sharira is what has been mapped in the modern neuroscience, right? So the Pranamaya Kosha is mapped to the reptilian brain, which takes care of all the instinct related activities. And the Manomaya Kosha is the limbic brain, which takes care of all the emotional systems. So, your amygdala, your hypothalamus, like those things take care of the limbic brain. And then the Vijnanamaya Kosha is the neocortex, which is the rational mind, which has the mirror neurons and, which talk about the concept of right and wrong. So these are very clearly like mappable in the brain, and there are different areas of the brain which manifest these different koshas. Okay. And then the Anandamaya Kosha is the causal body, Karana Sharira we call, and that is where like free will, tendencies, and karma phala, the Sanchita karma and all those things are all belong to the causal body, right? Now, these are the 5 layers of an individual, which are identified both by the Upanishads, like if you say Taittiriya Upanishad has this presented in a beautiful way, both in the Brahmanandavalli, it gives a theory, and then in the Brihuvalli, it gives a story to illustrate this 5 koshas. And Gita also talks about the 5 koshas in several places, right? And this is, and then Shankaracharya has taken it up, and then he has, in all the Prakarana Granthas, he has explained it very clearly. Now, that we have kind of understood the theory, to get the theory deeper, let us do a small exercise. And I would prefer that you have a pen and a paper with you, then it will be easier. But in case you don't have, it is okay. Like you can do it in your mind also. So let us try to identify these 5 koshas within ourselves, right? That is the best way to understand this, right? It's a kind of an, like an open-eyed meditation, right? So the first is Annamaya Kosha. So you can think about, or you can write, what is your height? Like the height of the body, the weight of the body, place of birth, name of the parents, complexion, color of the eyes, color of hair, whether hair is there or not, all those things belong to the Annamaya Kosha. Clear? So you can, now you're able to see what is this Annamaya Kosha, what all come under Annamaya Kosha. Then when it comes to Pranamaya Kosha, right, all your biometrics, like your the life metrics, right? Uh, Body temperature, pulse rate, blood pressure, sugar level, your allergies, illnesses, like, so all these things come under the Pranamaya Kosha, which is basically the physiological system. Okay. Now, coming to Manomaya Kosha, this covers your skills and knowledge, and your level of anger. Are you short tempered? Are you more patient? Jealousy, arrogance, desire, greed, fear, your likes and dislikes, right? In the domains of, food, places, weather, movies, books, activities, hobbies, all these things, your likes and dislikes. And like, like suppose if you say, okay, I like this particular food. Now that faculty by which you like that particular food is a faculty of the Manomaya Kosha. Okay. Now these are all come under the Manomaya Kosha. Buddhimaya Kosha is your value system, right? What do you think is right? What do you think is wrong? Right? What do you think is the significance of honesty, kindness, and discipline? Your patriotism, political affiliations, right? Religious beliefs. So these all come, the value systems all come under Buddhimaya Kosha. Okay. And then comes the Anandamaya Kosha, which is basically your life situations and the life situations you have faced in life, like the opportunities you have been blessed with, your willpower, these all come under the Anandamaya Kosha. Now, how much they influence, now all these things happen in your life, and next we will see how these operate. This is more, what I'm giving you is more at a structural level, right? Now, next we will go to the functional level of how these work. Okay. So I hope, like, just spend a few seconds on this, so that you are able to distinguish between your own Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Buddhimaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. Okay. Now, in the first step towards the spiritual life, the first step of Vedanta, where we call as the Vyavaharika model, you are asked to disidentify yourself from Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, and Buddhimaya Kosha by establishing your identity with the Anandamaya Kosha. When we go to Advaita, we will we will give up that identity also. But when you are, as long as we are not reaching the Advaita, what we will consider first step is to establish your identity with the Anandamaya Kosha or the Karana Sharira, and using that as the foundation, you have to disown the other four koshas. That is the first step in spiritual life. Okay. Now, this is with this, we'll see like how what is a functional model, right? Like, so this is a model which Vedanta gives. So let us start with, let us say you have a situation in life. Now, where does the situation in life come from? It comes from your karma phala. So you have the store of the results of your past actions, and based on that, you get into a situation in life. So a situation in life builds around you. I will give you an example. Let us say, for example, like I do I'm hungry. I'm in a hungry situation, and I see some mangoes in a cart. Someone is selling some mangoes, but I don't have money, and that is a situation which is created by my karma. Now, the jiva as the deciding agent using the free will. So now we are defining the jiva as the wielder of the free will, that entity who holds the free will and who is responsible for the action and the decisions is the jiva. The jiva definition is that entity which holds the free will. Okay. The wielder of the free will who is responsible for the decisions that he or she makes. That is the jiva. So now in this situation, the jiva has to decide. Okay. Now, what are the influencers? So one is, from the memory, I have the options of based on likes and dislikes, which is presented by my manas, right? So the manas says, okay, here is a mango. You have eaten a mango before. The mango is tasty. The mango will appease your hunger. Now, this is presented to by the manas. Now, the buddhi presents the case based on right and wrong. Okay. So, based on right and wrong, the buddhi says, but you don't have money. What are you going to do? You can't steal, right? Maybe you can beg, but do you want to beg? Like, it analyzes the situation based on right and wrong, right? What is right? What is wrong? Now, that discrimination is done by the buddhi. So, now if you go towards your manas, that is called prayas. If you go towards buddhi, that is called shreyas. Any decision, your manas will present from likes and dislikes, and your buddhi will present from right and wrong, and you have to make a decision. And if you decide based on the likes and dislikes, that is called prayas. And if you decide based on right and wrong, it is called shreyas. Kathopanishad, second chapter, gives it in a very beautiful way, right? And the another influencer here is the samskara, the store of tendencies and habits, right? So the samskara, or otherwise also called vasana, they try to influence your decision. Now, given all these things, the free will, the jiva uses its free will and makes an independent decision. Now, if you eliminate all these dependents as, okay, these are all available, but then apart from this, the independence is always there. The free will is free. Otherwise, there is no meaning to the word free there, right? There is a freedom there. Now, the jiva, using the free will, makes a decision. Now, once the decision is made, then what happens? That results in the current results, the phala, right? The immediate result. And the immediate result is not only affected by the current decision, it also is affected by the previous karma phala, the store of the results of past actions, right? This is what, like usually given as the meaning, karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, right? So you make a decision, but then the result is also influenced by the previous karma phala, which is of course your own karma, past karma only, There is no external factors here. You make a decision, and that the current result is a result of your current decision and your past actions, right? And this also, your current decision also feeds back into your memory, your samskara and karmaphala. So there is a feedback. So your current decision also affects not only your current result, it also, some portion of it of the is stored back into memory, and some it reinforces or weakens some tendencies and habits depending on the decision you make, and also it feeds into the store of the past actions. Okay. Now this is the model which is presented to by Vedanta. Now this try if you fully understand this model, whatever questions which I had raised initially, right? Like, like why is some child born into rich parents and why is another child born to poor parents? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why some people are lucky? Like all those questions are answered by this model in a pretty logical and beautiful way. Now, one thing is, this whole model assumes that the the free will is there, and free will is the core for this whole model. Okay. So the individual is defined as the holder of the free will. So what is the definition for the individual, the jiva? It is holder of the free will. Now, free will, one moment you assume free will, right? Now when you say free will is always defined as, when I have done an action, did I have the choice? Like, of course, if I want to fly like a bird, I cannot. Okay. Now, where does, so how much of free will you have? Now, there is a certain amount of free will to a limited extent, but the free will is there. Like once, there are a lot of stories related to this. Once, a disciple asked a guru, is there free will? Now, guru said yes. Then the disciple asked, can I do anything I want then? Then the guru asked, okay, stand up. So the disciple stood up. The guru said, lift your right leg. Then the disciple lifted his right leg. So the guru said, see, you have free will. Out of your own free will, you have lifted your right leg. Yes. Now the guru said, now lift your left leg also. Then the disciple, how can I lift my left leg also? I will fall down. Then the guru said, yeah, see, that is the limit of your free will. So always, like, the free will is defined as, for a particular action, did you have the freedom? Kartumva, akartumva, anyata kartumva. Did you have the freedom to do it or not do it or do it differently? So that is what is called as the free will. Now, free will and law of karma go together, because without law of karma, free will has no meaning. Suppose, let us say, there is no connection between my decision and the result, then I cannot make a decision. When we say free will, we say I have the freedom to decide. Let us say, but this, I cannot make a decision if there is no constant relationship between what I decide and what happens. Let us say, for example, I'm hungry. Now, if there is no relationship, like say today I'm hungry and I eat food and my hunger doesn't go away. Tomorrow, let us say, like, I'm hungry and I eat, my hunger goes away. And another day I eat and my friend's hunger goes away. Like, if there is no law, if there is no causal relationship between me eating and my hunger going away, then when I'm hungry, I cannot make a decision to eat. I'm able to decide only because there is a constant law in the background. Now, that law is called the law of karma. The causal, the causality, right? Like the moral causality we call, right? The moral causality works only if there is a law of karma. So without law of karma, free will has no use. Okay, so free will and law of karma are two sides of the same coin. Free will is at an individual level, law of karma is at the universal level. And against this constant universal law, we use our free will. If there is no law of karma, we cannot use our free will. Free will is of no use. Okay. So, and the whole system is, there's a fairness and justice in the whole system. Nothing is lost. Okay. Nothing is lost even by death. because there are, like as we saw, there are differences even at birth. There is a taratamya we call, like even at birth there are differences. So different situations can happen only if there has been a different cause before. A cause can, if the effects are different, then the cause has to be different. And similarly, a person can do different things even at the last moment of death. And what happens to that cause, right? It has to have some effect. So now moment we assume that there is free will, then law of karma is just has comes logically. Law of karma, without law of karma, free will has no use. Okay, now moment we bring law of karma and free will, now we have to start explaining the causality, and we have to start explaining the differences in birth and the action done at the last moment of death. And not everything that a person does in life bears fruit in the current life itself. So there has to be something, otherwise the law of causality will not hold good, which cannot be there. Law of causality is one of the basic fundamental laws of nature, which in all physics students will know, like conservation law is the basic law of nature. So all your Kirchhoff's first law, second law in electrical engineering, or your flow equations, everything, your del dot equal to zero, del dot b equal to zero, Maxwell's equations, everything is just different ways of putting in the law of conservation. And the same law of conservation which is applicable in the physics is what we apply here to the moral field, and that is what is called as moral causality. So you can say moral causality is just your del dot b equal to zero applied in the field of morality and free will, and like this is the same law, the same universal law applied here, right? And so nothing can be lost, and nothing is lost even by death. So because of this, rebirth, past birth, they become a logical, rational corollary to free will. You cannot assume free will but say there is no rebirth. That becomes it becomes illogical. It is not according to the laws of nature. Okay, now, so you reap what you sow, right? So you reap what you sow. Actually, this is not a quotation from me. This particular quotation is actually from the Bible, but the same thing is what is there in all the religions, all the scriptures. Every religion, they have to assume some way or the other a post death existence, because all religions assume free will, because without that it will become, the logic will get broken, right? So the jiva decides based on what it wants to experience for itself. So now, how does the law of causality work? So the law of causality works saying that you do unto others what you want others to do to you. This is not a rule for your behavior. This is the very law itself. It assumes that you do what to others what you do to you. So which means, like, if you cheat others, then nature says, oh, okay, so you like to be cheated by others. That is how nature understands your action. All your motivation, all your actions, all your desires are interpreted by nature, by the law of karma, as you do to others what you do others to what you want others to do to you. So it is better that you keep this in mind when you do your actions, and that becomes the foundation. And this golden rule has been very beautifully given in the Gita: Atmopamyena sarvatra samam pashyati yorjuna sukham va yadiva dukkam same yogi paramo matah, right? Like, so, like Gita gives it in a very beautiful way. And as long as the jiva considers itself as an individual, free will is true. Now, this is where, like, we just want to put a tinge of where does moksha come into picture. So moksha is the dropping of the individuality. Okay, now, as long as you consider yourself as an individual, free will is true, free will has to be assumed, you cannot escape free will, and the cycle continues. Okay, so first let us understand the first step, where the jiva considers itself as an individual, because that is where we start from. And as I told you, like, you identify yourself with the free will, and your annamaya kosha, which is the body, your pranamaya kosha, which is life, your manomaya kosha, which is your emotions, and the buddhimaya kosha, which is the intellect. They are all various instruments in the hands of the jiva, and the jiva is your identity. So this is the first level at which, Vedanta asks you to proceed. This is the first model given. And based on this, you proceed. Okay. Now, this is kind of a summary. Now, now here, as you can see, right, here we are dividing it into three. So the gross body is Annamaya Kosha, the Stula Shariram, and the subtle body is the Sukshma Shariram, right, which is the Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, and Vijnanamaya Kosha put together is called the Sukshma Sharira, and the Karana Sharira is the Anandamaya Kosha. Now, these are the three bodies at an individual level, which is called the Vyashti. Vyashti level, this is what it is there. And the Atman or the consciousness is an independent entity which is beyond these also. And the consciousness reflected on the Karana Sharira is called Prajna. And this is what is, this whole thing is about, like Mandukya Upanishad and Mandukya Karika is basically about this whole thing. And so this consciousness reflected on the subtle body is called Tejasa, which is on the gross body is called Vishwa. So these are technical terms. And these all put together is the Jiva. So the Atman plus causal body is called Jivatma, and the Atman plus the entire thing is called the Jiva. Okay, Jivaha. Now, the same thing, there's a parallel in the Samashti level, which is at the macrocosmic level, which is at the universal level. So all the gross bodies of all the jivas put together is the gross world, Stula Prapancham, right? At the gross level. So the gross world, and this is the world which is recognized by science, the material world. The entire physical universe is called Stula Prapancham, which is the sum total of all the matter which is there in this whole universe. Okay. Now, similarly, all the subtle bodies, the Sukshma Shariras of all the Jivas put together is called the Sukshma Prapancha, which is called the subtle world. Okay. And then all the causal bodies, all the Karana Sharira of all the Jivas put together is called the Karana Prapancha, which is the causal world. Now, just as how the individual, the consciousness gets reflected on the individual different bodies, similarly, the consciousness also gets reflected on the universal level. So the consciousness reflected on the gross world is called Virat. The consciousness which is reflected at the Sukshma Prapancha, the subtle world, is called Hiranyagarbha. And the consciousness reflected at the Karana Prapancha is called Antaryami or Ishvara. Now, this whole thing put together is called Ishvara. And this is the concept of God as per Vedanta. God or Ishvara is the universal being who encompasses everything that exists. So it is Ishvara is the conscious universal whole. Okay. Now, here again you have the causal world, the causal level, you have the Antaryami, and then at the subtle level you have got Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha is another. So if you look at this in the this is the Vedantic way of putting it, and the Puranas put it in a very nice way. You have the infinite ocean of the Kshira Sagara, where on Ananta Vishnu is sleeping, right? So Vishnu is the cause. So that's the causal. He's a cause of everything, and from Vishnu's Nabhi, lotus comes, and in that Brahmaji comes. So Brahmaji is Hiranyagarbha, that is a subtle world, and then Brahmaji creates the gross world, the Virat. Like this whole thing is kind of put in a picture in the for us to easily understand, right? So now this is the Ishvara. Okay, so just as the individual has a physical body, a subtle body, and a causal body, similarly Ishvara has the whole physical universe as the physical body, and then the entire subtle world, all the minds of everyone put together as the Hiranyagarbha, right, as the mind of the Ishvara, and the Karana Sharira of all the individuals put together becomes the Karana Prapancha. And this will work at everything, like you have your individual Prarabdha Karma and Sanchita Karma. Similarly, you have the universal, the Samashti Prarabdha Karma, and all those things will work. And It's a whole thing built. So the whole is a very beautiful, consistent, self-consistent logical model which is built, and this is the Ishvara. So now let us understand Ishvara more, right? So Ishvara is the conscious totality. So the whole universe is considered conscious, and that consciousness of the whole universe is what we call as Ishvara. Okay. Now, Ishvara is defined as Abhinna Upadana Nimitta Prayojana Karana. So I will explain to you what it means. Like this is very beautifully explained in Mundaka Upanishad using the example of a spider. Like so, Upadana Karana means the okay. Let us finish. Yeah. So Upadana Karana means material cause. Like say, for example, let us take, or if any of you has studied Western philosophy, you would have known the different causes which Aristotle has brought in. Like that is basically Upanishads, of course, date a few centuries before Aristotle. And Aristotle gives up with the same thing: material cause, intelligent cause, formal cause. The same thing is what is here as presented in the Upanishads as the Upadana Karana, Nimitta Karana, Prayojana Karana. So let us take a pot. Okay. Now, the pot has clay as the Upadana Karana. Clay is the material cause of the pot. And the potter is the Nimitta Karana, right? The intelligent principle which made the pot. That is the Nimitta Karana. Now, you are going to use the pot to hold water. Now, if water is not a liquid, you will not need a pot. So, the Prayojana Karana of pot is water. So, water also becomes a cause, or the liquidity of water becomes the Prayojana Karana for the pot. Now, when it comes to Ishvara, we say Abhinna. Abhinna means non-different. So in case of a pot, you have clay, the potter, and the water or milk, right, as the three different causes: Upadana Karana, Nimitta Karana, and Prayojana Karana. But in case of Ishvara, it says Abhinna, which means all the three are the same in case of Ishvara. And these three Karanas is what we call as Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So as Upadana Karana, Ishvara is called Sat. He is the essence of the whole existence. And as the Nimitta Karana, Ishvara is consciousness. And as the Upadana, as a Prayojana Karana, the reason for this whole world is the bliss of Ishvara. So this entire universe is made. What is the material of this entire universe? Ishvara is the material. Who made this entire universe? What is the consciousness principle which is behind this entire universe? Ishvara is the consciousness principle. Why is there this entire universe? It's the bliss of Ishvara. The Ananda of the Ishvara expresses itself as this whole universe. This is all beautifully expressed in, if you Taittiriya Upanishad, if you read the Brahmananda Valli, right? It talks about how the world has come out of Ishvara as an expression of Ishvara. That is there. Mundaka Upanishad says this, and Gita also talks about this in multiple places, right? So this is the concept of, so this whole universe is conscious, and it is a conscious expression, and it is made of Ishvara. Ishvara is a material cause, and it is an expression of the bliss of Ishvara. So that way, Ishvara is the complete reason or complete cause of this whole universe. And Ishvara is, because of this, he's not away from this universe. He's transcendent because Ishvara is the cause. As a cause, he's transcendent, but he's also immanent. Like suppose if you take a clay, right? Now the clay is immanent in the pot. Now, but even when the pot is destroyed, the clay is not destroyed. So from that point of view, the clay is transcendent also. Also, as the consciousness principle, he is transcendent. So this is what Gita 10th chapter 20th shloka, like, right, uh, talks about the same thing, right? It says aham atma gudakesha sarva bhutashaya stitah. So aham adischa madhyamcha bhutanam antayevacha. So when the Lord says aham atma, so he says I am the chit, right? Aham atma gudakesha sarva bhutashaya stitah, and aham adischa madhyamcha aham bhutanam antayevacha. So I am the beginning, middle, and end of all living beings. So which means what? Like he's the immanent cause. Just like how clay is the before the pot was there, clay was there, and clay is inseparable from the pot, and even after the pot is destroyed, the clay will be there. So the pot is made of clay, right? So that is the immanent cause, right? So this way, like, the Lord, the Ishvara, is both transcendent and immanent in this whole universe. And Ishvara is conscious, he is omnipresent, he is omnipotent and compassionate, right? So Krishna tells in the Gita, Bhoktaram sarva yajna, Bhoktaram yajna tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suhridam sarva bhutanam jnatva mam shantimuchati. So he says, I am the Bhoktaram yajna tapasam. So he is the Bhokta of all actions, external and internal. All external actions are yajna, all internal actions are tapas, and he says bhoktaram yajna tapasam. So I am omnipresent everywhere, and I am the recipient, I am the enjoyer, I am the experiencer of all actions, external and internal. So that is what is meant by omnipresence of the Lord. And sarvaloka maheshwaram, he says, I am the Lord of this whole universe, right? So he is omnipotent. And suhrudam sarva bhutanam, so he is compassionate, right? Because he is the one who is experiencing everything. Like, so if like, whatever sorrow or whatever happiness or sorrow which everyone goes through, as an antaryami, he is the one who is experiencing everything from inside. So he is naturally compassionate, right? He is a suhrudam sarva bhutanam, right? So this is another aspect of the Ishvara. Then another aspect is he's a context sensitive interface. This is a very important aspect to understand. Now, basically, like, Ishvara is the whole and the Jiva is the individual. And this relationship between individual and the whole appears at all transactions. What does it mean? Now, suppose, let us say, I am considering myself as a earthling, as a person who is living on earth. Now, as in that context of me considering myself as a living being on earth, now Ishvara becomes the whole, which means he is the Vasundhara, the mother earth. If I consider myself as a living being who's dependent on the sun for all my energy, Ishvara becomes Surya Devata. If I consider myself as a devotee who is going to take bath in the Ganga as an individual, Ishvara becomes the Ganga Mata. If I consider myself as an individual who is doing karma, doing different actions, Ishvara becomes the Karma Phaladata. If I consider myself starting some action, he becomes the Vigneshwara. If I start studying something, he becomes Saraswati. If I seek wealth, he becomes Lakshmi. So at every context, as I consider myself as an individual in a particular context, this in the same context, the universal entity becomes Ishvara. Because Ishvara is the super universal entity and I am the super individual. And depending on the context, as I express or manifest my individuality in a particular context, the corresponding universal context, corresponding universal entity in the same context becomes Ishvara. So that is our understanding of Ishvara, and that is how everything becomes Ishvara. Ishvara is worshipable to everything. If I am a consumer of a forest product, then the forest becomes Ishvara. Okay. So, and as an individual, when up to every of my individual identity, the corresponding universal identity is what I face as Ishvara. So this is a, so he says, yo yo yam yam tanum bhaktaha shraddhaya architam ichchati tasya tasya chalam shraddham. So he says, like, whoever worships me through whatever way, in whatever form, I respond back through the same form, through the same way, and I respond back appropriately. And this holds not only to worship. Yo yatamam prapadyante, right? Tameva vedamyaham. Like he says, like, however, even for a secular aspect, even for anything that you consider yourself as an individual and you behave as an individual, in that context, Ishvara automatically takes the form of the universal and responds to you or interacts with you. Now, this is the context sensitive interface which you need to understand as Ishvara. And Ishvara is the one who sustains by being conscious. Now, here, basically, this is what, again, like the second law of thermodynamics in physics you have. Any unattended system will degrade over a period of time, entropy will increase and it will collapse, right? So for example, like if there is a house, as long as like there is someone in the house who keeps maintaining and keeps making minor repairs now and then, without that, eventually the house is going to collapse over all the accumulated repairs, right? So anything in this world needs constant maintenance. There has to be energy pumped into the system continuously to be maintained, right? That is the second law of thermodynamics. The same second law of thermodynamics, if you apply it to the morality, it becomes yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanama dharmasya sadatmanam srijamyaham. So law of karma is there. Law of karma is there. There's a system which works. Law of causality is there. Everything is there. But left to itself, that system is going to collapse because of the second law of thermodynamics, which can also be applied to the morality and the law of karma. So what does the Lord do? He comes and cleans up the system by inducing a heavy negative entropy occasionally. So the Lord is a negative entropy he brings into the system of morality, right? And so that that is how he sustains the whole system. So that is what we call in the Puranas as avatars, right? The Lord comes as avatara and sustains the system, and which is basically like which so that the system continues, right? And this is also is done by Ishvara. And the jiva is a reflection of Ishvara. Now again, this is a grain of thought which we want to put it here, saying that the universal is, as we said, we talked about the context sensitive interface, where the jiva, when he considers himself as an individual, the corresponding whole becomes the Ishvara. Now, suppose the jiva considers himself as pure consciousness, what happens? Then the jiva and Ishvara become the same, because at the consciousness level, there is no individuality. Now, as long as and the jiva is in fact a reflection of Ishvara. Like 15th chapter, Krishna says, Mamaivamsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha, right? A part of myself, Mamaiva amshaha, right? Mamaivamsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. He says jiva is sanatana, is eternal, right? That's why Karana Sharira is eternal. Now, as Sanatana Jiva, the Lord Himself is reflected in each Jiva, right? So this is the whole concept. This is the aspect, right? Now, with this background, let us quickly go through now the 6 questions. What is the nature of the individual? The individual is the wielder of the free will, right? The one who holds the free will and one who is responsible for all the actions. He is the individual. And what is the nature of God? The conscious totality is the nature of God. For every of my individual context, the corresponding universal context is God, right? The conscious totality. And what is the nature of the world? The world is just the sthula prapancha, right? The physical universe, which is of course the physical representation of the God, of God Himself, right? And why is there human suffering? Human suffering is because of my own making. Now, so what is the so basically like I just face the results of my own action, right? Not knowing that I will have to face everything that I do. I make mistakes and I learn the lesson hard, and I suffer, right? So why is there human suffering? Human suffering is there because I do things without knowing the law of karma. If I know the law of karma, then I would not do the all the stupid things which I do, right? And what is the state beyond suffering? So is this cycle? Now one way you can say is, okay, keep on doing good and then you will always face only good. But then also there will be a time when you feel, okay, what next, right? Tatah kim, like what next? So what, right? Even if you have the shariram swarupam, like there's a beautiful shloka by Shankaracharya, like even if I have the most beautiful of the bodies and most best of the health and everything, so what next, what next, right? So even if I do all good things and if I face all the good things in life, now what is there next? I will seek. So ultimately Vedanta says you have to know your own nature as pure consciousness and know yourself as a reflection of God. Mamaivamsho Jivaloke, right? Jivaloke Jivabhuta Sanatanaha, Krishna says, right? So you realize yourself as the pure consciousness, and with that, once you have identified yourself as not different from God, that losing your identity is the state beyond suffering, right? What is the means to that state? We said like there are two steps. First is you identify yourself as an individual jiva who is the holding the free will, and first forget about your identity, drop your identity with the annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, and vijnanamaya kosha. Hold on to the identity of the karana sharira, the anandamaya kosha, and finally give that up also. These two states is what we saw, right? Like yesterday also I mentioned 15th chapter, like when he talks about the urdhva adashakam. So there Krishna says asanga shastrena dridena chitva, right? Like, so you break the lower roots by asanga shastra, right? And then next you to resolve the next state, where the second step, where he says adhyam purusham prapadye, you surrender to the Lord. That is the second step. So these are the two steps, and to go to that means to go to that state without, which is beyond all suffering. Now this is a concept which is given, this is a model given by Vedanta, right? This is a, and so far whatever I presented to you is the Vyavaharika model. We'll go to Advaita next. Before we go to Advaita, a small interesting thing. Here is a quotation from Albert Einstein, where whatever we have been talking so far, he puts it in his own beautiful words, right? A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affectation of a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole nature in its beauty. The true value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and sense in which they have obtained liberation from the small self, right? The self with a small s. So, this is beautifully summarized by Einstein, right? About whatever we have seen so far, right? Okay, so now let us go further, right? And okay, so we have 50 more minutes. Let us see. Okay, so let us summarize what we have seen so far, right? So we talked about two things. One is free will and moral causality. Now, I consider it as an assumption because, as I told you, these are all non-verifiable stuff, right? These are not verifiable. These are beyond science. These are, like non-negatable, right? Like these are all, you cannot conduct experiments. So it is an assumption, but it's fairly a good assumption. It's a good working model, right? Because it answers all the questions that we have, right? So the assumption is free will and moral causality. Individual is the holder of the free will. Law of karma is there. There is a fairness and justice in the whole system, and nothing is lost even by death, right? And assumption two, conscious totality, transcendent and immanent Ishvara, abhinna nimitta upadana prayojana karana, and context sensitive interface and sustenance by being conscious. Ishvara sustains the whole universe. So this kind of summarizes what we have been talking about for the past 1 hour, right? So now this looks good, but then this is not enough. Now, in Mandukya Karika, Mandukya Upanishad, which is explained in Mandukya Karika, of course, both Mandukya Karika and Shankaracharya's commentary on the Mandukya Karika, there are certain logical issues or problems which are pointed out in the two assumptions that we have made. We made an assumption on the jiva, the individuality of the jiva, law of karma, and all that. So the question is, where did this cause and effect cycle start? You say Janma, right? By living in this world, you do karma, and that karma phala determines your next Janma. So this Janma and karma cycle, Janma creates karma, karma creates Janma, Janma creates karma, karma creates Janma. This cycle, when did it start? When did it will end? Now, how can there be an infinite cycle? And if you say the cycle is infinite and you cannot get out of it, then what is the whole point of this whole thing? What is liberation? Right? So, this is the first problem. The second problem is, okay, you said Ishvara is the cause of this whole universe, and a cause cannot become an effect unless it is subject to change. So, if the cause changes, then does Ishvara change? And nothing can be done in this universe without an intention, and intention implies desire, and desire implies dissatisfaction. So, which means Ishvara is dissatisfied. Why did Ishvara create this world? Right? Without a desire, no one can do anything. And what does this whole thing mean? And any change implies the change subject to time and space, right? The moment there is change, you have the shat vikaras, right? And so if you say Ishvara changes, then does it become that? So if you remember, yesterday in the beginning, we talked about different theories of creation, where we talked about, like the Parinamavada and Vivartavada. So these problems are the problems if you assume Parinamavada, and that is why Advaita Vedanta introduces Vivartavada. Okay, so the change is only apparent, it is not real change, and there is no desire here. It is a leela, a spontaneous expression of bliss. So that is the what is explained as the cause of the world. So now, and so these kind of problems are there, which you can read more in the Mandukya Karika if you're interested, right? And these problems are resolved by bringing in Advaita. So now, what is Advaita? What is Advaita Vedanta? So Advaita Vedanta basically says there is no two, everything, there is only one. Okay, so let us look at it. Let us look at so there are various Mahavakyas in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, and Shankaracharya has picked up 4 Mahavakyas, each from each Veda, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Vedas, and he has explained it. But the number of Mahavakyas is innumerous throughout the Vedas, everywhere it is there. And a Mahavakya basically is one which says the individual equal to the universal. There is no difference between individual and universal. We will see how. So here, let us take one of them. This is the Taittiriya Upanishad. This is how the Brahmananda Valli starts. Brahmavida apnoti param tadesha bhyukta. So Brahmavida apnoti param. So the knower of Brahman attains the supreme. That's what it means. And next, the Upanishad says tad esha abhyukta. So now this is Taittiriya Upanishad, as you all know, comes in the Krishna Yajurveda. And here the Yajurveda quotes a few shlokas from Rig Veda. In fact, this entire Brahmananda Valli, like it is a lot of quotations from Rig Veda is given. Everywhere it will say shloko, bhavati, esha, like, so whenever it says, it basically means, okay, there's a quotation, it will end with iti. Okay. So tadesha abhyukta basically means, okay, it has been told like this somewhere else. So satyam jnanam anantam brahma. So Brahmavidu apnoti param. So here the definition of Brahman is given. Satyam jnanam anantam brahma. Okay. So Brahman is Satya, Jnana, Ananta. And what it is, we will discuss next. Okay. Now, what do you mean by Brahma Vid? The Vid. So first the explanation was about Brahman. Brahman is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. That is the definition of Brahman. Next word is with, right? What do you mean by with? So here, yo veda nihitam guhayam parame vyoman. So parame vyoman. Vyoman means the space in the center of the heart. That is called as parame vyoman. That is the guha, the guhayam parame vyoman. So there you need to realize. So realize know the Brahman inside your own heart. It is not enough if you know Brahman as an object. You have to know Brahman as the subject, as the essence of your own individuality, right? This is what is mentioned, like Chandogya Upanishad talks about Dahara Kara, like Dahara Vidya. So everywhere in all other Upanishads and Gita, and even in this thing, Mahanarayana Upanishad, like you have the Narayana Sukta, where also the same thing comes, right? Like uh, uh, where also the entire Narayana Sukta is a beautiful meditation on this whole concept. The first part of Narayana Sukta talks about Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, how the Lord is the universal, and the second part talks about how to meditate upon the Lord in the heart, right? And so Narayana Sukta is a very beautiful, practically how to do it. Is told there. Then, what do you mean by apnoti param? So that is explained here. Sho saha asnute sarvan kaman saha. So he attains all his desires or go away together, and brahmana vipaschiteti. So by means of Brahman. Vipachita iti. Iti basically is a end of quotation. So tadesha bhyukta, that starts the quotation, and there's an iti here, which is the end of the quotation, which I've skipped it here anyway. So and rest of Brahmananda Valli is further explanation to this. So you have the explanation of Srishti, which is the explanation of this one, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Then you have the Panchakosha Viveka, which is an explanation of Yoveda Nihitam Guhayam. And then you have the Ananda Mimamsa, which is the explanation of the Saha Ashnute Sarvan Kaman Saha. So the rest of the Brahmananda Valli of Taittiriya Upanishad basically explains each of these lines in a complete, in more elaboration. Okay. So here we will use a different prakriya. That is one prakriya which is used in the prakriya basically means pedagogy, right? Like there's one prakriya which is given in the Taittiriya Upanishad, but here to suit the modern scientific students, the students with the scientific background, I will introduce you to another prakriya of understanding what is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Okay. So let us go ahead here. Like, well, listen carefully. Like, this is a very beautiful part of the whole Advaita Vedanta. So, Satyam basically means existence. Okay. So now, whatever we see, right? So we have our perception is very limited. Okay. So, for example, like we see this world with different colors. Now there are different insects or different birds which can see well into the infrared or well into the ultraviolet, whose perception will be very different. And our we mainly rely on our sense of sight and sound, whereas if you take a cat or like they might rely more on their smell. So when we enter a room, we only see people who are there, whereas a cat can see, okay, in this place this person was sitting half an hour before, this person had been to this person's house because I can smell that person on this person. Like, it can arrive at so many. The perception is very, very different for different beings. And what we perceive is only what comes out of the whole existence, which is capable of perceiving by our limited sense organs. So what it means is, the reality what we perceive is very, very different from what we actually see. Okay. And all properties are only emergent. Like, say for example, we see something as yellow. Now, why do we see something as yellow? Because that reflects the yellow light and absorbs all the other light, right? And if you look at a microscopic level, if I look at an yellow object through an electron microscope, I won't see yellow there, right? I will see only molecules which don't have any color. So even, like that way, every element, right? Like if you take water, right? Water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen burns and oxygen supports burning. but then water puts out fire, right? Like, so the liquidity of water is, or the specific heat of water which actually puts out the fire, is actually an emergent property. If you split it into its components, you will not find that property there, right? So if we keep splitting things into its fundamental elements, right? Like as per science, like, okay, everything is made of molecules, and you break the molecules, you get into atoms. You break the atoms, you go into subatomic particles like protons, electrons, neutrons. You split them, then you have, like the standard model where you have quarks and leptons, and like, so thing is, when you start going deeper and deeper and deeper, right, ultimately the question is, what is the nature of the fundamental substance? What is the fundamental substance which exists, and what is its nature? This is the question which we are asking. So now, this assumes monism, which means that everything in this universe is made ultimately of one particular substance. That is what is mean by monism, right? Now, there is one particular fundamental entity out of which this entire universe is made of, and we are asking what is that substance and what is the nature of that substance. Now, all properties are emergent. So, if you say color or texture or touch, everything is basically an emergent property. So, now when you say what is the fundamental nature, we can easily come to a logical conclusion that the fundamental substance will not have any property, because if the fundamental substance has any property, you can again split it into something more, into its components, because all properties are emergent. Okay, so when you go to the fundamental substance, by whatever name you call, the Vedas call it as Satyam. When you say Satyam, it means the fundamental substance of this entire in existence. So the fundamental substance should be Nirguna. Okay, the logically you can prove that the fundamental substance, whatever it is, it has to be Nirguna, free from properties. Now, moment we come to this particular conclusion, then any change is only change of properties, right? Any change, whether with respect to time or with respect to space, any change is only a change of properties. So a nirguna vastu, a nirguna substance, will automatically be nirvikara, which is free from change. And the moment you say free from change means it is eternal, nitya, and it is free from change in both time, which is nitya, and also from space, which is sarvagata, which is omnipresent. So the moment you say there is a fundamental substance, a fundamental entity, it is nirguna, and automatically by corollary it becomes nirvikara, and by corollary it becomes nitya and sarvagataha. And any difference between one substance and the other substance is only by property. So moment you have a substance which is free from properties, there can be only one of its kind, which is ekam. Okay, so the moment if we assume there is one fundamental substance, which is the core substance out of which this entire existence is made of, immediately, logically, all these corollaries come. It has to be nirguna, it has to be nirvikara, it has to be nitya, sarvagataha, and it has to be ekam. There cannot be two fundamental substances, because they will limit each other, right? There can be only, because two substances can differ only by properties. When there is no properties, there cannot be two substances. There can be only one substance. So Satyam is ekam. Let us keep this. Next, we'll start another enquiry, another prakriya, similar one. This is based on Dirigdrishya Viveka starts this beautiful prakriya, right? And which is about consciousness. Let us try to understand what is consciousness. So we will look at the subject-object relationship. Okay. Now, here, what I'm going to tell you is basically straight lifted out of Dirigdrishya Viveka, a beautiful text. So let us say, like, I see something. Okay. Now I see something as black, something as white, something as green, something as red, right? So if you look at the subject object relationship, this transaction, right? Now the red color belongs to the object. The red color, the black color, the white color, they all belong to the object. And I extend my subjectness till my eyes, and by which I'm able to judge the properties of the object. So by extending myself till the limit of the instrument, which is my eyes in this case, I am able to judge the properties of the object. Okay. Now, let me see. My eyes have properties. Like I might have myopia, hypermetropia, I might have color blindness, I cannot focus, you know. So my eyes have got various properties, and those properties of my eyes cannot be known by my eyes. They can be known only by the mind which judges the eyes. So I have to withdraw my identity from the eyes, and I have to restrict my identity just up to the mind, and treating my eyes as an object, I can judge the properties of my eyes. Okay. So to judge anything, I have to make it into an object. Then I can judge the properties of the object. Now, similarly, when I want to look at, my mind is angry, I am worried, I am anxious, like all those things, I have to again withdraw. So now the question is, if I keep on withdrawing myself, where will I lead to? Who is this ultimate subject which can never become an object? The real I, the real I is the ultimate subject which can never become an object. That is my I. That is the ultimate I, right? Aham. Aham, the real I is I who can never be an object, right? The ultimate fundamental subject is I. Now, because properties belong to objects only, right? Now, the as we all saw, right? In every subject object transaction, the properties belong to the object, right? So, what is the nature of I, the ultimate subject? It has to be nirguna, right? The ultimate subject, which is I, which can never become an object, right? Which is the subject, cannot have any properties. I am nirguna. Aham nirgunaha, right? Now, we know we have already done this prakriya before. That which is nirguna has to be nirvikara, and that which is nirvikara has to be nitya and has to be sarvagataha, and that which is nirguna, nirvikara, nitya, sarvagataha has to be ekam, right? So when I analyze who am I, and when I analyze who am I and identify myself as the ultimate pure subject, which is different from the object, then I, the subject, the pure consciousness, cannot have any properties. And because I cannot have any properties, I cannot change, and I am eternal, I am omnipresent, and I am ekam. Now, this is what is Advaita. So, Satyam equal to Jnanam. Satyam is the ultimate essence of this whole universe, the material of this whole universe. Jnanam is pure consciousness, the I, and both are the same because of what we have seen, right? We proved logically, we did an analysis, and we find that Satyam equal to Jnanam. I, the consciousness, am the fundamental substance of this entire universe. This is the conclusion of Advaita. Advaita is pure logic, right? Pure logic, you just apply and you will arrive at Advaita. Now, my teacher, Swami Paramarthanandji, he explains this in a very beautiful way, and this is also explained in the scriptures. Let us take, for example, space and a hall. Let us say the room where you are in, right? Now, there is space in the hall and there is space outside the hall, right? In the scriptures, we call it Ghatakasha, right? So the space inside the gata or pot. So here we can call as the hall, right? And there is the space which is outside the hall, right? Now the space inside the hall is the same as the space outside the hall. The space inside the hall is the same as space outside the hall, which implies space is not in the hall, but hall is in the space, right? The space inside the hall and the space outside the hall are identical, which implies space is not in the hall, but hall is in the space. Now you apply the same thing there, right? And you will get the universe. I don't exist in the universe, but the universe exists in me. Now, a very detailed analysis of this concept is what is there in the Avastatraya Viveka, or the analysis of the three states of existence, the Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, which is there in the Mandukya Karika, which itself will take a few hours. So I want to leave you with this thought, right? You can read, you can think about it, and you can go ahead. Like, so, like, this is very beautifully given. Kaivalya Upanishad, there is a very beautiful statement. Mayeva sakalam jatam, mayi sarvam pratishtitam, mayeva sakalam jati. Like it says, like, everything exists in me and everything is born out of me. And it is told by the Jnani. The Jnani says, mayeva sakalam jatam. From me alone, everything has come. And, like, and everything exists in me, right? Like, so there's a lot of Vedas, like Upanishads, basically talk about this particular concept, and it can be logically derived and proven like this. Okay. So now we come to another concept, which is Maya. So what is the nature of the universe? Now, to understand the nature of the universe, you need to understand Maya, because we know, okay, fine, like pure consciousness, we know what it is, but why does this world exist? That's a very this is a very common question. It's a very pertinent question, even in physics. Why is there something than nothing? Like, why does this whole universe exist instead of nothing being existing? you know so that is where we come to Maya. And there is a physicist, Dobson. I forgot his first name, John Dobson, or like in fact, like the Dobson Mount telescope is named after him. And he has written a lot of articles on Advaita. And there is a beautiful article which he wrote called Equations of Maya, and you can search it on the internet. And he lived in the Ramakrishna mission in Berkeley, I think, for some time. And he's a great physicist, and he has written about explaining Maya in terms of physics. So here I will briefly explain to you, right, this whole concept of Maya. Maya is basically how the finite exists versus the infinite. So anytime you want to have an analysis of finite versus infinite, you will hit this Maya in terms whether it is mathematics or physics or everywhere. So let us take an example from mathematics. Okay, let us take the number line. We all know the number line, right? When we were in school, we used to put like 0, 1, 2, 3 on a graphing sheet or on a paper. So we have this thing, the numbers, right? Whole numbers starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The number line is there. Okay. So now, if I ask you how many numbers are there, you will say yes, there are infinite number of numbers. Now, when I ask you what is 3 minus 2, now 3 minus 2 is 1, which is when you consider 3 and 2 as finite, right? But between 3 and 2, how many numbers are there? There are infinite numbers, right? Now 3 minus 2 apply equal to 1 applies only when you consider from the finite point of view. Now when you look at it from infinity, infinity minus 3 equal to infinity minus 2, because the distance between 3 and 2 is infinitesimally small from the point of view of infinity. So from the point of view of infinity, 3 and 2 actually are not two distinct numbers at all. Okay. Now, this is the conflict you run when you go between finite and infinity. So what does it mean? Infinite exists from the point of view of the finite. Because if I say finite, I say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can kind of say, okay, if I just keep on going, when it is very huge, that is infinite. Like I say there's an infinity. So infinity exists from the point of view of finite. But finite does not exist from the point of view of infinity. If I look at it from the infinite point of view, the each finite point is infinitesimally close to each other, that they don't actually exist as distinct points. So the finite does not exist from the point of view of infinity. So whenever you come in any field, when you compare finite and infinite, you will hit this paradox. This paradox of the how does the finite exist in the background of the infinite? Because logically, from the point of infinite, finite cannot exist. There is no logic. It cannot be there. This is a paradox. This paradox is called Maya. It can be explain it in maths, physics, everywhere you can explain it. So the universe exists only from the point of view of the finite. It has a relative dependent existence. So how you can there is a lot of you can try to understand. Once you have got this core idea, I'm sure you can just go and look it up, and you can think about. I want all of you to do a lot of manana. What you're doing now is only shravana. Do a lot of manana where you try to understand this and digest it, and then you will be able to uh, get a picture of what is this Maya, right? So between Jiva and Ishvara, this is what we find, right? So at an individual level, at a finite level, Jiva is there, Ishvara is there. As long as Jiva identifies itself as an individual. Moment this individuality, this avidya, right? So this avidya, right, which is the individuality, as long as this avidya is there, this individuality is there, the jivatvam is there, the atman reflects as the jiva. And this same individuality at a cosmic level is called Maya, as I told you. Now, if this is dropped, then what exists is pure Atman only. That is why it's called Purnam Adaha, Purnam, Purnat, Purnamudachate, Purnasya Purnamadaya, Purnameva Avashishyate. Right? So that is what is meant by that Shanti Mantra from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and Aisavasya Upanishad from the Sukla Yajurveda. So now this avidya and Maya, right? This is whole thing is summarized by Shankaracharya in a very beautiful way. This is from Tattva Bodha, right? Avidya Upadi. Upadi means adjunct, right? Avidya Upadi san, with the Avidya Upadi, Atma Jiva iti uchyate. Atma is called Jiva. Maya Upadi san, Ishvara iti uchyate. So the same Atma, right? With the Avidya Upadi, it becomes Jiva, and with the Maya as Upadi, it becomes Ishvara. Okay. Evam Upadi Bedad Jiva Ishvara Beda Drishtihi Yavat Paryantam Tishtati. So because of this difference in the Upadi, right? This Jiva Ishvara Beda Drishti, the difference between Jiva and Ishvara, this Jiva Ishvara Beda Drishti, Yavat Paryantam Tishtati. As long as you have this difference, this Veda Drishti, Tavat Paryantam, till then, Janma Maranadi Rupa Samsaraha na Nivartate. The Janma Marana Rupa Adi Samsaram. Like so this Janma Marana Adi, so Janma, birth and death, etc. In this form, Samsara, the cycle, na Nivartante, na Nivartate. It doesn't end. You don't get free from the cycle. Tasmat. So, tasmat karanena, because of this reason, na, don't, jiva ishvarayoho beda buddhihi svikarya. Don't have this beda buddhi between jiva and ishvara. So, drop this avidya upadi, identify yourself as the pure atma, and that is the way to become free from this cycle. There's a very beautiful conclusion, right, which Shankaracharya gives in Tattvabodha. Now, let us go to the summary the Advaita summary, right? We saw Shankaracharya again summarized in a very beautiful way. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, Jivaha, Brahma Yeva, Na Aparaha, right? So Brahma is Satyam and Jagat, when you consider as the limited world, it is Mithya, right? Because it is Maya Upadhi, son, right? So the Jagat is Mithya and Jiva Brahma Eva. The Jiva is Brahma. So from the ultimate point of view, and Na Aparaha, not different, right? So the Jiva Jagat Ishvara model is not negated. So just now in the previous slide, we saw that at the Vyashti level, it is Jiva. At the Samashti level, it is Ishvara. So this distinction exists only as long as you are in the relative realm, right? In the uh, ultimate realm, there is no difference, right? So when the Upadhi is given up, then there is no Jiva Ishvara Beda. The individuality is an illusion because of the avidya, right? As we saw the analysis of the individual, I am the pure existence, I am the pure subject. And from that point of view, there is no individuality, right? The individuality comes is only a relative one, right? And giving up the attribute, giving up the reality attributed to the concept of limited individuality is called moksha. When I realize, when I identify myself with the pure consciousness, then automatically I become nirvikara, right? And changeless and nirguna, propertyless, and sarvagataha, right? Nitya and ekam. So that understanding my individuality as the pure consciousness, which is beyond all limitation, beyond all duality, that is called moksha. Okay. Now, having understood Advaita, this is Advaita, let us look at the 6 questions, right? What is the nature of the individual? So, the individuality is an illusion. It is because of avidya, me, the pure consciousness, identifies as an individual. And what is the nature of God? The same consciousness, when identified with the universal, is God. And what is the nature of the world? World is just the matter, and that is just a part of the whole nature. It is just a product of this whole avidya. And why is there human suffering? Because I don't know my real nature. I identify myself with a limited individuality, and that is why there is human suffering. What is the state beyond suffering? Me knowing myself as pure consciousness beyond all the dualities, right? Just like how we saw yesterday, like the screen is not affected by the water and the fire and the earthquake which happens in the movie. The screen is not affected. Just like that, I am, my level of reality is higher than the level of reality of this entire universe. I am much more real as pure consciousness than this whole universe. My reality is one level higher, and nothing in this universe can affect me, the pure consciousness, because I, the pure consciousness, is nirvikara. I am free from change. Now, that is the state beyond all suffering. What is the means to that state? Me knowing my real nature is the means to that state. And of course, that needs preparation. And that is why we had the 2 steps. The first step is to identify myself as the Jiva and the pure Jiva, free from the other 4 koshas. And the second step is to identify myself as the pure consciousness beyond even the individual Jivatva. So that is the means, right? So this is how we go. Now, before we conclude, I know only 15 minutes, this is the last slide. Okay. So before we conclude, let us see how to practice it. Now we saw these 2 steps, first step and second step. After listening to this whole Gita, Arjuna in the 12th chapter, he asks, hey Krishna, should I follow the first step or should I follow the second step? Okay. So Arjuna asks this question, and Krishna says, okay, well, second step is the one which is going to give you liberation, but the second step is difficult, right? Klesho bikatarastesham, right? Avyakta sakta chetasam. He says like it is very difficult. So he says you go step by step, and Krishna gives a big discount. He gives a big discount for us, where he says you follow the first step, considering Ishvara as God, with along with bhakti. You follow the first step, and he says, I will do the second step for you. What does he say? He says, Etu sarvani karmani mayi sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavamina chirat partha maya veshita chetasam. 12th chapter, 6th and 7th shlokas. So Krishna says the whole thing. I will explain to you, right? First is, right, matparaha. Matparaha means having God as the goal, right? Lead a virtuous and self-disciplined life with God as the goal and not the worldly things as the goal. Not money, not pleasures. Those things should not be your goal. Have God as the goal. Matparaha. Then offer all actions to God. Sarva karmani mayi sanyasya, right? So Shiva Jnane Jiva Sheva. There is a word coined by Swami Vivekananda, right? So consider this all the living beings as God Himself and serve the world by as service to God, right? So the Etu Sarvani Karmani Mayi Sanyasya Mat Paraha. If you do that, then Ananyenaiva Yogena, right? Without being distracted, right? Don't be distracted, which means what? Do all your everyday actions remembering the Lord. Keep doing Namajapa as you get involved in doing all your duties in the world. Then meditate upon God. Mam dhyayanta upasate, right? Sit at least for a few minutes every day and meditate upon God. And if you do this, this is all this is the first step which we talked about, right? The first step which talked about is basically summarized here. If you do this, Tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavamina chirat partha maya veshita chetasam. The Lord will free you from all bondage, right? How he does the exact technicality, he explains in the 10th chapter, 9th and 10th slokas. He says, Buddhi Yogam Dadami Me. Like, so he says, I'll give them the light within they will understand and all that. So the summary is, you understand the first step fully and you do this sadhana where you can put that and implement it, and the Lord will make you understand Advaita over a due course of time, over a period of time. So this is the practical aspect which Gita talks about. And with this, I will end for now. So thank you. I think we are almost only 10 minutes more. Let us see if there are any questions we can take.
Thank you, Gokul Mataji. It was another excellent session, and I think we have one or two time to take one or two questions. I will just read it out. One question is: some scientists came up with a theory that the world is a multi-dimensional computer projection. What role does speculations like this play in Advaita Vedanta? Would the acharyas consider this as a avidya or as an attempt to walk the path?
See, um, when you come to our Vedanta, right? See, these are all different ways of explaining the universe. Okay. Like if you read Yoga Vashishta, for example, it gives so many ways of explaining the universe as Maya, like, like as a dream, as a, like projection, as so, and in fact, like it talks about multi universes also. Like the Yoga Vashishta talks about multiple universes and universe within a universe. It says, okay, at the tip of this mountain there is a small pebble. Inside that pebble there is a whole new universe. You enter there, and then there you find so many things. Like all, there is nothing new which is being proposed. Okay. Now what we need to see is, are you talking about a material universe? You might say there is multiple universes, multiverse, universe within a universe, and everything. Advaita Vedanta just puts up everything into just one statement, says, okay, everything is anatma. Anything other than yourself, anything other than pure consciousness is material, and it is just, you're talking about matter. Now, whether matter is the fundamental entity or consciousness is the fundamental entity is the question. Okay, and this is again cannot be verified, cannot be proved. Science starts with the concept that matter is a fundamental entity. You might still say, okay, like there is pure, you talk about, like string theory and multiple universes and everything. But ultimately, still, you have not come out of the paradigm of material universe. The materialistic monism that matter is a fundamental cause of even thought and consciousness is a fundamental paradigm which you have not still broken out of it, right? And moment you consider matter as a fundamental entity, you cannot explain Srinivasa Ramanujam, or you cannot explain the whatever observations from University of Virginia, like on rebirth. All these things will still be unanswered questions, and you might propose that there is multiple universes and then everything, and still you cannot answer a question why I should not commit suicide. That question is still unanswered. What is the purpose of life? That is unanswered. So the questions which we are trying to answer here are entirely different, and no materialistic paradigm can answer these questions.
We have another question. Can you please explain the portion universe is in me and I am not in the universe?
Yeah. So, okay. So, see, basically, the question is when I consider, see, that comes from first thing is like if you have gone through it logically, right? We showed that I am pure, my real nature is pure consciousness. And this pure consciousness, which is this pure consciousness is the fundamental entity of this entire universe also. This whole universe is made of pure consciousness. That is what is meant by Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. So moment you have equated Satyam as Jnanam, that consciousness is the fundamental entity in this whole universe. So now, what is the status of this universe? Now, the status of this universe is this universe exists in me, right? Just as how Shankaracharya gives a beautiful analogy in his Dakshinamurti Stotram, right? Just as how the dream universe exists in the mind of the dreamer, just as how the dream universe exists in the mind of the dreamer, similarly, this whole universe exists in the consciousness of the perceiver, right? This perceiver is there, and this whole universe exists within the consciousness of this perceiver, just like how the dream universe exists in the mind of the dreamer.
I think we have time to take one more question. This will be the last question. How does Vishishta Advaita, or the concept of personal God, gel with science, in your opinion?
See, now science considers matter as the ultimate entity. Okay, there is nothing in this universe other than matter. Consciousness is a product of matter. That is science. Vishishta Dvaita says Saguna Ishvara is the fundamental entity. Everything that exists in this universe is Saguna Ishvara only. The Stula Prapancha, the physical universe that you see, is an Amsha of Ishvara, and all the Jivas are also Amshas of Ishvara. So the fundamental paradigm is different. The fundamental paradigm of science is matter is a fundamental entity and matter is Jadavastu. It is insentient. And consciousness is a emergent phenomena. Consciousness is a product of matter according to science. Now, Vishishtadvaita considers Saguna Ishvara as the fundamental entity, and this entire universe is a product of Ishvara. Okay, the physical universe, matter is a product of Ishvara, and all the jivas are also products of Ishvara, and Ishvara is the fundamental entity. Saguna Ishvara. Advaita Vedanta says Nirguna Ishvara is the fundamental entity. Vishishtadvaita says Saguna Ishvara is the fundamental entity. That is the difference, right? Sajatiya, Vijatiya, Swagata Beta Rahita, Nirguna Ishvara. That is the definition for Nirguna Ishvara. Sajatiya Vijatiya Beda Rahitaha Swagata Beta Sahitaha is the definition for Saguna Ishvara. So that is where the difference comes between Nirguna Ishvara and Saguna Ishvara. Like I think you can look it up. Like these are technical terms, and these are all like very well thought about by the best minds of this world. Okay, so you have to ask the question to the right people, and they will give you the answer. There is nothing which is not explained, or nothing which there is no like halabulla here. Like these are all proper, rigorously analyzed, logical, rational thoughts. Okay, so every word of this, like sajatiya, vijatiya, swagata, beda, rahita. When you say, it's a very specific, you have to understand every word of it. Then you can really understand what is meant by Nirguna Ishvara. Similarly, like when you say Saguna Ishvara, it is very simple. Sajatiya, vijatiya, beda, rahitaha, swagata, beta, sahitaha is Saguna Ishvara. So you can just note this down and you can look it up. I'm sure a lot of acharyas, a lot of people have given very fantastic explanations on all these things, because I learned all these things by listening. I did not learn these things by reading. And I was fortunate to have great gurus, both in Ramakrishna Mission also I had very great gurus, and I also have Swami Paramarthanandji as my teacher, and I have learned all these things by listening to them. And you can also go to the same sources, you can listen to them. Everything is available, all knowledge is available. You just have to seek, right?
Thank you, Gokul Mataji. And on the behalf of Advaita Academy and all the viewers, I thank you for agreeing to come on this show, on the program, and sharing your thoughts, knowledge. It was a very fascinating session. Lot of food for thought, lot to learn and reflect upon. Viewers, if you want to know more about Gokul Muthuji's life journey and his journey into Vedanta, a few weeks back we did conduct a weekend conversation wherein I interviewed him on his life and journey. You can just check the video in on our YouTube channel. Or so. With this, we come to a conclusion of this week's Weekend with Wisdom. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and for announcements about next week's event. On our website, we have a calendar wherein we are publicizing the events which are organized by us, as well as events which are happening related to Vedanta, which may or may not be organized by us on each day of the week. So you can just check it out. You can attend them whatever you like. So with this, we conclude this session. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Shri Ramakrishna.